Hey everyone, Cell here with the first Mage Blood build. Now that I have a Mage Blood, I said in my last video I'd be experimenting a little more, kind of pushing the limits on a couple characters, and this is the first of those. Now, you may be saying, this looks a lot like one of the old builds you did, with the Detonate Dead, Chain Detonate Dead, or Volatile Dead of Seething Trickster. And yeah, it's pretty much the exact same build, but as an Elementalist. I wasn't a huge fan of the Trickster's defenses, and if I was going to change to my preferred defensive setup that this character uses, I wouldn't be making effective use of the Ascendancy as a whole. So I decided to try it as an Elementalist. Why Elementalist? Well, my setup, excuse me, is going to be mostly defensive in nature, gear-wise, and Elementalist is pretty much entirely damage. So I figured it would balance that out. By going more offensive in the Ascendancy, you can lean more heavily on your gear for defenses, which is where most of my defenses are going to come from anyways. So that's just kind of my preferred method. And then as a little splash of defenses on top of that, the fourth Ascendancy node I pick is the Elemental Aegis node. You can see in the upper buff bar, 2175. Elemental damage will be taken from the Aegis prior to my health, or alongside, perhaps. And another reason was I started leveling another character before I got the Mage Blood, just out of an interesting idea I had as a Necromancer. And that was sitting at level 68 because I decided I didn't really want to play the build anymore. So it was an easy respec to the Elementalist from that point. And then, no joke, character's level 92 now. Took me like a few hours to get to 92 from 68. So, very satisfied with the pacing on the character so far. And as I mentioned in my previous videos on the Trickster, the damage is just very solid on these skills, especially when you're bypassing the kind of friction from having to use two different skills by automating it in the way that this setup does, with the two cast on crit setups between the Desecrate and the Detonate Dead or Volatile Dead. And we can scroll that back a bit because this video is moving faster than I thought it was, but as a showcase of what's possible with my current setup, this is a little cheesy, but I'm about to tank the Uber Cyrus, this fight is, Meteor, in the final phase here, using, on top of my baseline defenses that are always active, my Elemental Aegis is up, my Molten Shell will be up for like 3,800, something like that, and I have an Enkindled Progenesis. I ended up getting a second Progenesis, so I figured I'll enkindle this one for, I think it's currently at 65% effect, and that puts you at 41% damage deferral, is what I tend to refer to it as now. But yeah, you can see I can just barely survive here. Well, I had 1,800 HP left, but this is good because when I swap Flasks for Uber fights, I give up my Quicksilver and my Silver Flask, so I'm missing a lot of movement speed and can't really make it out of the maze fast enough, which I believe we'll see in the same video footage. So the main worry here, as is often the case with these Ubers, is that I don't, or the degens are the biggest damaging part. I do have Leaf Shade. There's a little bit more I can do against degens as well. But yeah, so far just taking down Uber Cyrus and Uber Maven. I did get an Awakened Fork from this Uber Cyrus kill. Not this one, the previous one that I didn't have footage for. Do I tank this one as well successfully? Yes, but that one was a bit bigger of a hit. Everything's got a range, of course. Still survived it. And the build has insane recovery, so it kind of took off from there. Anyways, like I said, taking on Uber Cyrus and Uber Maven. Haven't tackled the other Ubers yet, but I'm sure it will deal with them pretty well, for the most part anyways. Maybe not, but I'm horrible at the Uber Exarch fight. Just personally, the ball phase I'm not great at dealing with, but for the most part, I think it's ready to take them on, even at level 92. A lot of power to be extracted from the last 8 levels, and utility as well, but let's hop on in game and I can show off the character. So this is my more typical mapping kind of Flask setup. I've got Quicksilver and Silver here. The Silver isn't of huge benefit to us because of the nature of the build, being cast on crit and all that. A better attack rate is nice when you don't have full, like, capped crit chance, but for the most part I'm using this for movement speed, which is kind of slightly weird because I don't have a movement speed suffix on any of my Flasks, just because I value the other stats more, I suppose, but yep, Quicksilver, Diamond, Granite, and Silver Flask with armor, crit chance, shock avoidance, and mana cost suffixes. Mana cost is nice because my skill costs 3 mana. I'm getting 2 mana per enemy hit here. So on top of that, with the consideration of Volatile Dead or Detonate Dead, it should be for mapping, is 6 mana. So pretty good, all things considered there. No major sustain issues. You'll notice I am running Clarity, but that's mostly because I have a free gem socket, and the damage per aura or herald mastery. So in total I'm running 6 auras. 48% damage from that mastery is pretty good. I am using an Aureus End as well for mapping because the build has so much recovery, which I'll get into momentarily, that there's kind of no point in me having a life flask, and so a unique flask is the way to go. And it helps out a little bit with clear. Sometimes you get like a nice chain explosion. I have quite a bit of generic damage, either elemental or straight generic damage. So that helps a lot here. Then of course I have some fire specific damage as well, which only helps a third of the time, but still, it's not extremely noticeable. Also rip, someone died in the void. And so I mostly just threw it on because I had it. I wouldn't be like hurting for it if I didn't have it. And I'd probably just use my Progenesis instead. Of course, you don't need a Progenesis either, that's not what I'm saying. But basically, if I didn't have a Mage Blood here, I would use a very similar setup, just wouldn't have as good of uptime. On the Diamond Flask, instead of the prefix, I would have Flask charge gain on critical strike to have better uptime on that. This definitely makes the build feel significantly better. I don't have all my buffs and all that up, but it's giving me 26% crit chance at the moment in Hideout, so it goes a long way to make it feel more consistent. Now, offensively, again, very similar to the last character, in that using 2 Rain of Arrows of Saturation, and the point of that is these arrows come down a lot more sequentially for quite a while, and basically, if your cooldown for cast on crit has elapsed, by the time another one in the same attack hits an enemy, that same attack can trigger cast on crit again. Which is why you see people using a lot of like multiple hitting skills for cast on crit. And this is basically the bow version of that. So Rain of Arrows of Saturation with cast on crit from the bow, a Shaper Influence bow, with Detonate Dead or Volatile Dead, and then just damage supports for the most part. And then over here, we have a Rain of Arrows of Saturation, Mana Forge Arrows with Life Tap, Cast on Crit, Spell Cascade, to trigger the Desecrate. So basically every time you attack, you're setting off 2 Rain of Arrows of Saturation. When one of them crits, it's going to spawn corpses for you to use. When the other one crits, it's going to trigger Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction or Volatile Dead of Seething. Now, defensively speaking, I'm currently leveraging one of my favorite defensive setups, especially for Ubers, which is Divine Flesh. So 50% of elemental damage taken as Chaos instead, and plus 5 max Chaos Res. So just by virtue of that plus 5 max Chaos Res, you're taking less elemental damage from everything. And that's even more so the case against Ubers or anything else as penetration. So Uber Shaper, his Frostbolt attack, the slow, glowy ball that he does, that has 40% penetration in the Uber fight. With Divine Flesh, you're shifting half of that damage to Chaos damage. The attack does not have Chaos damage penetration, or Chaos penetration. It only has cold penetration. So by shifting that damage taken over to Chaos, you're taking significantly less damage as a result. Then, in Crucible League, they added the Fourth Vow, which makes armor also apply to Chaos damage. So you're familiar with Jug, who makes 8% of his armor apply to elemental damage. Well, basically, because I'm taking half my damage as Chaos, and applying all of my armor to Chaos, this is like 50% of your armor applying to the elemental damage you take. It's kind of slightly more complicated than that, but that's the general gist of it. And again, that's helped by the fact that you have plus 5% max Chaos Res because it runs through your resistance first before doing the armor calculation. So that's one of my favorite defensive setups, and so I'm stacking a little bit of armor. I could get a lot more. In my POB, I had 55k, I believe. I'm not quite doing everything I originally planned. If I open the right skill tree, you can go down to Sanctum of Thought here and use an energized armor in this slot to pick up the energy shield to armor conversion from these 2 points and these 3 down here. And that is a ton of extra armor. Haven't done that because I don't know if it's particularly worth it. I wanted to try out Ubers and go from there, see if I felt like I needed it, as well as some general mapping things as well. But so far, 34k has felt pretty good. That has helped immensely by my Flasks, which is why I wanted to try this character with a Mageblood. Without Flasks, I'd be at 13k, significantly less damage reduction. If I didn't have the Mageblood, I would probably try more so to force the energized armor here for, again, these 2 clusters. Now, another interesting thing is that Divine Flesh makes all damage bypass your energy shield. And so you could use this mastery, Armor and Energy Shield Mastery, to take 10%. Oh, hang on. I get the wrong one. I do this every time. It's an Energy Shield Mastery for 10% less physical damage taken while on full Energy Shield. I'm always on full Energy Shield because I don't have Eldritch Battery, so I'm not spending it. And I don't have Eldritch Battery because I need Inspiration. Well, not need, but I am using it. The real reason I don't have Eldritch Battery is Mana Forged Arrows, because you need to spend mana to trigger Mana Forged Arrows. And you can't do that if you're spending ES instead of mana. So, I don't take Eldritch Battery. All damage bypasses my Energy Shield. So I'm always on full Energy Shield, unless you're doing like Ultimatum or something and there's an effect that says, you know, you're moving Energy Shield, or Expedition has something similar. Or if you're using something like Frost Shield, which I also considered. Get into that in a second. But yeah, that opens up the possibility of using 10% less physical damage taken while on full Energy Shield. So again, just another layer happening there. Beyond that, defensively, you've got the normal Mageblood stuff. You may have seen I swapped to a Ruby Flask and a Sapphire instead of my Quicksilver and Silver Flask in the Uber Cyrus fight. I do similarly for Uber Maven, focusing on the Sapphire Flask for the most part. She also deals some lightning damage, generally. Sorry, I'm like bouncing around my menus so much here. But those are the couple of layers. Basically, the Divine Flesh Fourth Vow combo means that you can scale your defense against every type of damage with armor, because your armor is now going to apply to your physical damage incoming, your chaos damage, and the half of the elemental damage you take that gets converted to chaos damage. So it makes armor very valuable when you can do that combo. Now, another thing I'm doing is Defiance of Destiny. Normally, skills benefit greatly from like plus level spell skills especially. So you could get a +2 or even this league a +4 amulet, or potentially use a Replica Dragon Fangs for +3 if you're kind of meeting in the middle there. The Corpse Explosion skills do not necessarily benefit greatly from levels. So this is dealing 5% of the corpse's max life, and it'll go up to like 5.1% or something. The other flat fire damage will be increased as well, but it's so minuscule compared to the corpse max life damage that it kind of doesn't really matter. So again, I opt to use an offensive amulet rather than a defensive one. It's not fully catalyzed, but it is perfect life rolled. Basically what this means is that hits below a certain level of damage cannot kill you. Because if you're below a certain level of life and a hit comes in that's going to deal 30% of your health, well, the amount you recover is going to put you above 30% health. So therefore, it won't kill you. This is pretty good when you can reduce the amount of damage you're taking through things like the Fourth Vow, Divine Flesh combo, and Flasks, and spell suppression, and, basically whatever form of defense you get. I don't know if it was in my clip I showed earlier, but sometimes the Uber Cyrus Die Beam heals me. That has a little bit to do as well with my guard skills being up and all that. But yeah, it's just pretty comical that something that can easily one-shot your character, if not set up properly, actually heals this build. I remember one time I just did a handful of kills, which is why I still have portals open. One time I was basically almost dead, and the Die Beam brought me back up to full health. So that was absolutely hilarious and an amazing showcase of what Defiance of Destiny can do for you. Now on the tree, otherwise I'm using a ton of unique jewels in this build. So Glorious Vanity, of course, for the Divine Flesh, already mentioned. Storm Shroud, it's a classic Mage Blood combo. Modifiers to chance to avoid being shocked apply to all elemental ailments. So I have 53% chance to avoid being shocked on my Granite Flask, bringing me up to over 100% ailment avoidance. This applies to alternate ailments as well, like all other generic ailment avoidance. Then that's just a Corrupted Blood Jewel, literally nothing else on it. Have not been able to get a decent Corrupted Blood Jewel other than that one this league. I'm using a Watcher's Eye for life gain on hit while affected by Vitality. That's the only thing I get from this. I've been thinking about hunting a better one, but this is the mod I want the most, I think. And the reason for that is this build hits a ton. The 2 copies of Rain of Arrows of Saturation, as well as the sheer amount of times we're hitting with Corpse Detonation skills, makes the recovery from this alone incredibly good. So recovery, top notch on this build. I've got the life gain on hit, I've got the Defiance of Destiny, and I've got 470 regen. That's like 12 or 13%. And then another 2% whenever I've consumed a corpse recently. So round about 15% life regeneration, which is obscene. Then we've got Unnatural Instinct here. This one's kind of like not really anything. I've been thinking about replacing this because I originally dipped down into this area down here to pick up some more dexterity. But now that I'm using this 12 passive fire damage cluster, has a lot of dexterity on it, and I could get even more with a couple levels. So I don't think I need the amount of dexterity I was getting from down here. So I've been thinking about just respecking that, seeing if I can fix my spell suppression maybe through the use of more charms, in order to pick up more damage, basically, or life, but I feel like my life pool's pretty good at 41, 42. Another 8 levels would be another 96 base health, so probably put me at 4.3, 4.4k. And lastly, have a That Which Was Taken. This is the same one from my other character that I found pretty early in the league. Effective non-damaging elements, corpse life, and crit chance are all amazing for this build. So, very top-notch jewel. Probably won't be able to replace that unless I get one with like the exact same stats and the 4th mod is spell suppression or something. Ascendancy, I kind of completely glossed over this, but mostly damage from shock, and some defense and utility in terms of being able to run reflect maps. Yeah, have Leaf Shade as well because I'm in the neighborhood. I have this awkward node here because I'm at 97% suppression without it. So kind of dipped in, took a 1-pointer there. It'll be hard to fit that in on the rest of my gear. I guess I could try to get another pair of either Shaper or Conqueror. What's his name? I don't know, the Inquisitor guy. Don't remember his influence. Crusader, yeah, it's literally in the mod and I can't read it, but using cooldown recovery right there to hit a breakpoint for cast on crit. Other gear, spell suppression and minion damage on this, as well as life, res, bit of regen, basically whatever rolled nicely. This is a spiritual aid build, so just leveraging the generic minion damage where I can. Quiver is the worst part of my gear by far. It's got basically nothing on it. I don't know how I want to make the quiver just yet. Ideally, I could have an open suffix for the bleed immunity mod, which we can see over here. Not immunity, but it's the same effect as the Pantheon, in that you don't take extra damage while moving. And that is functionally equivalent to being immune for a build with enough recovery, which mine definitely is. Helmet, I'm using a level 4 Enlighten, almost at Empower, and a +2 AoE helmet. Again, didn't really set out to craft it exactly this way. I wanted reservation efficiency and chaos res primarily, but everything else kind of just fell how it has at the moment. So, generally speaking, gear could use some improvements. Rings, I'm satisfying like dex and res requirements. I'm not using any res flasks, as you might normally with a Mage Blood. So res is a little tight at the moment, which is why I'm making up for it on my quiver a bit. And that'll probably be what the end quiver ends up doing, because the more res I have on a quiver, the more suffixes that open up for other stats on other items. And really the main 2 good ones on a quiver would be that crafted bleed mod, which really just makes me immune to Burning Ground because I switched my Pantheon power, and global crit multi here from an Essence. Now, the video's running long, but I might as well make it a pretty long one, I guess, since I'm pretty interested in the build and like talking about it. Which pieces of this are mandatory if you want to play the build either the exact same way I have or similarly, like the archetype? If you want to play it exactly as I have, I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you have a Mage Blood. I'd recommend more something like the Trickster. That's going to have lower gear requirements. It's still going to be a smooth playstyle. And it was a good time. It was very fun. I'm really only pushing this archetype in the way that I am because I have a Mage Blood. So, and that build is uber viable with skill on the Trickster. It's not the most comfortable for me personally because I'm not the most skilled player, which is why I prefer a more defensive setup, but it is definitely doable if that's what you want to pursue. Now, if you don't have a Mage Blood, but you want to run the same like Divine Flesh combo, well, for starters, Divine Flesh is good for builds that can effectively utilize it, even without the 4th Vow. You don't need big armor numbers or the 4th Vow to run this effectively. It is just generally good against Ubers. And personally, I think it's one of the most underrated defenses against Ubers, specifically for the reason I mentioned earlier of circumventing the penetration they often have on their abilities. The unique jewels, Storm Shroud, you wouldn't use if you didn't have a Mageblood. Again, if I didn't have a Mageblood, basically I would turn off Haste and turn on Purity of Elements. That's pretty much it. And then, the Watcher's Eye. If you're in trade, I have to imagine a life gain on hit Vitality Watcher's Eye is insanely cheap. You could probably, I imagine people don't value it literally at all. So you could probably find one with a pretty good mod if you wanted to. Again, you need to run Vitality. Mine's level 19, aiming for 20, 21, but you could run a level 1 if you really needed to. Because again, I have a level 4 Enlighten, and if I needed to drop something, I would probably drop some levels on my Vitality to keep my precision as high as possible. I'd run a level 1 Clarity instead of level 4, or just not at all. And I could drop my Defiance banner as well. The other jewels are, for the most part, very optional. That which you've taken, you just get the best one you can for either damage, defense, or utility, depending on what you want. The Unnatural Instinct, here, again, I'm mostly just using it because I have it. It's getting me some recoup, some mana, which helps. I was actually mostly using it for the dex here. And of course, the 12% life is pretty nice, as well as accuracy and crit chance. It's in a pretty good spot here for this build, but again, not completely necessary. The build's pretty tight on skill points, mostly because I'm using a lot of unique jewels, and so I have to kind of go out of my way a bit to get jewel sockets. But that could be alleviated if you make different decisions in building the character. And yeah, I think that pretty much about covers it. If you are going to copy the build at all, I would recommend just focusing on crit chance, just to make it feel better, possibly even swapping out your 6th link here for Crit Strikes gem. I've done that a little bit myself even. Don't really need to at this point now that I've got some levels under my belt and have my crit chance up. But it feels really bad when you've attacked multiple times and like you see the arrows falling, but the enemies are just standing there and nothing's happening because you didn't roll the crits that you needed to, so they just aren't taking any damage. You won't die or anything on a setup like this because you're recovering so much health, but it does make it a little awkward to play at times, so I'd recommend prioritizing crit chance where you can. Anyways, that has been an insanely long ramble after a fairly short showcase of the build on Uber Cyrus. If you are curious about anything else, definitely ask down in the comments, and I will be there with answers and or suggestions. Thanks for watching, especially if you've done so this far, because that is an insanely long time. Much appreciate the support as always, and I'll see you next time. Peace.